Hello, my name is Patrick Merrill, and this is my 2207 scene size up audio recording assignment. It is January 17th, 2019, and the time is 11 o'clock p.m. The scene size up is a critical component of all EMS responses and incidents. The scene size up process begins when the incident is first dispatched, and it does not end until patient care has been transferred and the incident is terminated. It is important to realize that the size up process is an ongoing process throughout the incident, and that EMS incidents can be very dynamic and fast changing. All components of scene size up process are vital to ensuring a positive and safe outcome for you, your crew, and the patient. Number one, I will ensure that my crew and I have taken standard precautions. On all patients, gloves will be worn. If the incident involves more than one patient, it's important to remember that gloves should be changed before moving on to your next patient. There's likely to be contact with bodily fluids such as blood, childbirth, endotracheal intubation, or other invasive procedures. Then a surgical mask with eye protection should be worn in those types of incidents. It's also important to note, with the resurgence of respiratory infections such as tuberculosis, or in cases of contact with any other airborne or communicable disease such as meningitis, swine flu, H1N1, avian flu, it's important to don a HEPA or N95 respirator. If large splashes of blood or any other bodily fluid is expected, such as an arterial bleed or childbirth, providers should don an impervious gown. It's also important to note that hand washing is the most neglected yet most important infection control measure that you can employ to avoid contracting or spreading any disease. So that's very, very important part of standard precautions in the EMS world. Number two, I will ensure that the scene is safe. My priorities for scene safety in order are me, my crew, other responders, my patient, and bystanders. If my scene is unsafe, me or another responder could be injured, and that would do very little to no help to the patient. The saying, "Fools rush in where wise men dare not tread," is appropriate to the scene safety component of the size up. A provider should always take the time to assess the scene using all the senses. Do I see anything that could compromise my safety? Do I hear arguing, a hissing sound that may indicate a hazardous gas leak? Do I smell the scent of rotten eggs that may indicate a hazardous leak of the exfoliant hydrogen sulfide? Personnel should never assume anything regarding the safety of a scene. That could be bad news if you ever do that. When scene safety is assessed, the responder should look for environmental hazards such as inclement weather, something like ice that may endanger the welfare of a patient being moved, heat that may cause exhaustion on a crew members operating on a strenuous outdoor cardiac arrest, unstable terrain such as avalanches and mudslides, structural components with damaged integrity such as a dry rotted deck that we may have to move a patient across. Swift water or flash flooding, electrical hazards such as a down power line or a lightning storm, and also confined spaces that may offer limited egress or access. A responder should also be aware of any potential hazardous materials such as toxic chemical spills that could ignite or explode at any moment's notice on any of these scenes. Harmful vapor clouds such as chlorine that can kill a responder very quickly. It's also important to note that violence can strike at even the calmest appearing of scenes. It's imperative that responders ensure the scene is safe from violence by using dispatch information and context clues. Are any weapons reported to be used in the incident? Is this an incident involving domestic violence? Violent incidents do not occur only in dark alleys in the bad parts of town. Violent incidents can strike anywhere. So it's important to always be constantly reassessing the scene as time goes on. If you suspect any notion of violence, it is of paramount importance that the police secure the scene prior to patient contact being initiated. On roadway operations, a fluorescent vest should always be donned and situational awareness should always be kept. Number 3, the responder should determine the nature of illness or the mechanism of injury involved in the incident to better provide care for your patient. In traumatic injuries, some things that should be noted are the forces involved, the direction from which they came, and the location of the body that are affected. That'll help you determine the mechanism of injury of your patient. Oftentimes, it's to be noted that traumatic injuries seriously mask the true condition of a patient. Life-threatening injuries such as internal bleeding may be masked by a gruesome compound tib-fib fracture, for example. It is important to look at the bigger picture rather than get tunnel vision when you're assessing these scenes. Providers should form an index of suspicion of what the extent of injuries are based on the mechanism. When assessing a nature of illness, providers can gather information from the most reliable source, which is the patient themselves. If that's not feasible, then bystanders and clues on scene can provide valuable information. One example is if I was responding to a 56-year-old male that's unresponsive, I may look around his bedroom and notice some insulin vials and insulin needles on the nightstand, and this would lead me to believe that I was in the midst of a hypoglycemic emergency. The responder should assess the number of patients on scene. Am I responding to a single gunshot wound patient, or am I responding to a mass shooting at a party? Will I be able to begin treatment of a single patient, or will I need to begin triage process on multiple patients to ensure the greatest good for the greatest number of patients? Will I need additional transport units, or will I be able to handle the incident with my ambulance alone? Will I need additional resources? Number 5, will I need additional resources? If the patient's trapped inside a vehicle with a dash deformity, then I would need to call on an extrication unit. For example, if I'm on scene with a bariatric patient, lifting assistance might need to be called for. We can call for fire personnel to help us out with that. A hazardous materials team may be needed to be called for a patient who's still laying in the roadway in a cloud of hazardous vapor. Swift water team may be need to be called for a whitewater rafter who's unresponsive on a rock in the middle of a Class 3 rapid. All these scenarios are examples of when a provider would need to call on additional resources. And also, it's better to have them and not need them than to need them and not have them. So never be afraid to call for additional help. And last but not least, number 6, if the patient's condition indicated C-spine compromisation, then I would initiate spinal immobilization according to my protocols. So that is my audio recording on the scene size up process. Thank you very much for watching, and have a nice evening.